Hello and welcome to an overview of Maine's Enhanced Person-Centered Planning Process, Part 1. I am Kristen Fortier, the Community Case Management Manager for the Office of Aging and Disability Services. This training has been tailored to case managers supporting adults with intellectual developmental disabilities and autism, including those who utilize Sections 21 and 29 waiver services. Today's webinar is the third in a series of person-centered planning trainings in advance of a rollout of an updated PCP process in EIS starting June 1st, 2022. We recommend, if you have not yet had the opportunity to view the first two trainings, you do so before proceeding with today's webinar. It will be helpful to you. All three person-centered planning trainings and related resources are available on the OATS website under person-centered planning. The learning objectives for today include 1, understanding how to use person-centered thinking during assessment and how that helps to inform planning and the importance of ongoing assessment. 2, supporting a person to create a plan that identifies who is important in their lives, their circle of support, develops a vision for their good life, balances what is important to or their wants with what's important for their health and safety needs across life domains, considers the concept of integrated supports to help achieve their identified goals, and if applicable, identifies the type of waiver services, including the amount or the hours, the frequency or how often, the duration, and the type of support needed. And 3, today we'll learn about how key HCBS global rule requirements relate to the PCP process and plan. So why are we talking about enhancements to the PCP process? As we shared in the recent Introduction to Charting the Life Course training, the concepts we will be talking about today are not something new, but a return or a recommitment to PCP principles that were developed with the closure of Pineland and the development of community-based services. Since that time, Maine citizens with intellectual, developmental disabilities and autism have been strong advocates for the development of services driven by their right to live, work, and be part of their community. By engaging with self-advocates, families, case managers, providers, HCBS and Charting the Life Course consultants, Maine is recommitting to strengthening a PCP process that focuses on people having the lives that they want. Some of the specific feedback we have received includes from self-advocates, a desire for self-determination and change. From a year-long community membership reform group, remove duplication and streamline the process. Develop a PCP that allows for a variety of planning methods, styles, and approaches. Create plain language tools that will be helpful for folks when they're planning. Focus on valued roles, places in the community, skills, interests, including implementing the Charting the Life Course framework. We're also talking about enhancements relative to a Department of Justice settlement agreement. That agreement indicates services will be determined through an assessment of functional need and personal preference, not through provider preference. It also states the PCP process must identify the amount, frequency, and type of waiver service necessary to the person and the most integrated setting appropriate. And also that choosing services and where they happen will be based on the needs and preferences of the person. Maine is shifting its focus. Person-centered planning will focus on what matters to all people. Person-centered planning is a process that begins with the understanding that all people have the right to live, love, work, have fun, and also be active and full citizens in their community. To that end, planning will help people figure out and pursue their good life. What defines a good life for a person is as individualized and unique as each individual supported. So person-centered planning is really a process of continuously listening, learning, and is designed to explore aspects of life that we all experience. What to do during the day, whether that include work, learning something new, volunteering, pursuing your interests and hobbies, or any kind of mix of those things. Who to have relationships with and how to be involved. Where to live and who do you want to live with. And then how to stay healthy and safe in the context of all that. We will also be focusing on life outcomes, not just the traditional focus on service outcomes. So really reflecting on a good life. A good life is a good life regardless of whether you have a disability. A person with a disability should not have different life outcomes. To support people in planning, it's important to keep those outcomes in mind and not just focus on service outcomes. And finally, we will focus on shifting to being a person-centered versus a system-centered approach. One of the greatest barriers to a person realizing their goals is restricting what can happen based on the limits of services and supports, particularly when we think about waiver services. As a result, the person may choose services or settings that really are not a good fit and do not help them work towards their goals. So the PCP process ensures the person is driving the direction of their PCP based on their vision, their person-centered vision, instead of being limited by what the system's priorities or what the system has to currently offer, which would be system-centered. Maine is also committed to assuring alignment with the home and community-based settings final rule and the HCBS Global Rule for short. The HCBS Global Rule was adopted back in January of this year. Part of our discussion today is assuring that both the PCP process and the PCP plan have alignment with both the federal and the state rule requirements. During today's presentation, slides that have a black ribbon, as you see here, will outline both HCBS process and plan requirements. Beginning on June 1st, 2022, adults determined eligible for developmental services and receiving targeted case management for the first time will engage in a 5-phased approach to person-centered planning. Individuals who are currently receiving adult TCM and have an existing PCP and EIS will start their planning using this approach in phase 2. As we move forward with this transition, remember that the PCP process can risk becoming a protocol, completed solely for the purpose of initiating services without a deeper context. If we aren't careful, what the process will mean for the person and their life moving forward can get lost. As we walk through these steps together today, recognize that the PCP process may look different and should have the flexibility to adapt to each unique person. However, it always prioritizes and provides information to help support the person in directing their process as much as possible and to enable them to make informed choices and decisions. For ease and understanding, each slide in this presentation is color-coded to correlate with each phase in the PCP process. Colors are consistent across this training and the soon-to-be-released updated PCP guide. To begin, we'll walk you through each stage of the updated PCP process, starting with phase 1. Phase 1 happens only once for each person. It occurs when a person has first been determined eligible for adult developmental services by ODES intake and has selected a targeted case management agency. Here, the case manager gathers information from informants and meets with the person and guardian, if applicable, in step 1. Next, in step 2, completes an initial psychosocial assessment and person-centered plan within the first 30 days of the start of case management services. And then in step 3, they enter both of those into EIS. This phase meets the requirements of the MaineCare Benefits Manual in Section 13, Targeted Case Management, for a comprehensive assessment and a plan of care. In addition, the HCBS Final Rule and the MaineCare Benefits Manual Global Rule requires that the clinical and support needs identified in a person-centered plan be identified through an assessment of functional need. The DS Psychosocial Assessment in EIS is a tool we use to help identify the functional needs of the person. So it is important to remember that the clinical and support needs identified in a psychosocial are, when they're identified, that we also address them in the person-centered plan. The initial 30-day psychosocial assessment looks at an individual in the context of their family and social environment, as well as the impact of any psychological factors on their physical and mental wellness and their overall ability to function. The initial psychosocial assessment is completed within 30 days of the start date of case management. It establishes a snapshot of where the person is at, including baseline information when entering services. And it communicates information about a person for these initial planning and informational purposes. If the person and their team have already decided or determined a desire to seek waiver services at this point, then the BMS 99 may also be another source of identifying a person's functional needs to be addressed in their person-centered plan. Next, you will work with the person and guardian as applicable to translate what you've learned through this initial assessment process into an initial 30-day PCP. This includes entering what is learned about the person in the PCP. This may include initial goals and actions to address any medical, social, educational, and other services and supports needed. The initial 30-day PCP will be reversioned and expanded on as more information is obtained in later phases. Part of your role in phase 1 includes educating the person and the guardian, if there is one, regarding the ongoing nature and the next steps in the PCP process. Here, you'll begin to get a sense of what advocacy training or support the person may want or need to be as engaged in their PCP process as possible. Phase 1 ends in 30 days when the case manager finalizes with the person the initial DS psychosocial assessment, which was started by ODES intake, and the initial person-centered plan, and enter them both into EIS. Next, we move to phase 2. Phase 2 occurs at least 60 to 90 days before the next effective plan date. It involves what happens after the development of the initial 30-day assessment and the initial 30-day PCP, and what you will be doing before the next annual plan meeting. Beginning June 1st of 2022, start all annual planning in phase 2. Together, you as the case manager and the person will work together to expand your knowledge of what matters to the person using person-centered thinking across different parts of the person's life, or a framework we call life domains. In step 2, you'll update the annual psychosocial assessment to include what you have learned about the person. Step 3 includes developing an updated personal profile, capturing who and what is important to and important for each person. In step 4, begin documenting what is learned in an updated annual person-centered plan. Let's walk through each of these steps together. In order to effectively facilitate a PCP, you first must be what we call a person-centered thinker. Person-centered thinking is really just the belief or mindset that people with disabilities are the experts in their own lives and what a good life looks like for them. If you ask any group of people what makes life worth living, we all tend to say the same things: family, home, belonging, respect, intimacy, having a say, work, making a difference. So person-centered thinking is really a simple idea. You put people first, listen carefully, learn who they are and what they want in life, then work together to identify goals, create a personalized plan, and then put it into practice. Person-centered thinking recognizes the right of each person to make informed choices and then take responsibility for those choices and any related risks. When we use person-centered thinking, we build on the strengths, gifts, talents, and contributions of each and every person. Initial conversations you have or may have during planning might center more around what is not happening. It may be that the person has really not had experience or a lot of exposure to options in order to make a choice or determine their personal goals. When lack of opportunities or exposure is identified, the PCP process is designed to help identify how this can change. In phase 2, be prepared to brainstorm and talk about new things to try and potential next steps. Together, begin to think about and learn what more might be possible for this person. Exploring the possibilities will help each person better understand their strengths, gifts, interests, and preferences. And keep in mind that the period of exploring may not be linear, and it never really ends. Phase 2 involves the case manager expanding their knowledge of the person using this approach of person-centered thinking. Together, the case manager and the person will consider who the person is, including their strengths, capacities, aspirations, and potential. What is important to the person, including their vision for a good life. Who are the individuals in the person's life or their circle of support? And specific goals related to their vision, which they want to work towards achieving. The case manager may use a variety of questions and tools across different areas of a person's life, which is a framework we call life domains, to help support information gathering. However, getting to know the person is really not about completing a checklist or an inventory of questions. The tools really of meaningful discovery can just be simple and intuitive. Interviewing, conversation, observing, spending time together, talking with people who know the person. The key to successful planning really is to slow down, ask questions, and listen deeply. As we shared in the recent introduction to Charting the Life Course training, Maine has adopted 8 life domains or categories to help promote these PCP conversations. These domains include employment, community engagement, communication and advocacy, home and housing, lifelong learning, social and relationships, healthy living, and safety and security. SUFU self-advocates believe if their case manager and the people in their lives explore these life domains during their PCP process, then they would talk more about life possibilities instead of settling. So finding out who and what is important to each person is key to successful planning. Exploring with each person across these life domains helps piece together the various elements that make up their vision for a good life. This is done through talking or other ways of learning together regarding what is working in their life, and then also what is not working in their life across each life domain. There are a variety of questions to consider across life domains to support the information gathering process. The updated PCP guide will include a list of sample questions for each life domain that may be helpful for you to consider. Here's one example: community engagement. So there are 8 life domains. This is one of them covered in the PCP guide. As you will note, there are some sample questions to consider when you're sitting down and talking with a person. For example, where do you currently spend time in your community that you enjoy? When you go there, what do you do? Considering what roles they're in. Who helps you get there? People you know, or can you ask for more information? Would you like to expand your role there, get more involved? How often do you get to spend time in your community? Are you involved in your neighborhood? What are some clubs or groups that you want to find out more about? And what are some of your interests, and where do people who have the same interests hang out? Who can help you explore these things? Family, staff, friends, or all of the above? The updated PCP guide also includes specific person-centered thinking tools that may be helpful for you as you talk about each life domain. Here's an example of a series of tools that may be helpful while exploring community engagement. Each of these tools can be accessed directly through the hyperlink in the PCP guide. A perfect week tool helps describe a person's ideal week, which is both practical and possible. A presence to contribution map. This is a way to have a conversation with a person to determine what they're currently, what level they're currently engaging in their community. And then reflecting on social roles. This provides a scale for predicting the extent to which a person will be performing different roles and interacting with citizens other than those who utilize services and paid staff. Here's another example you'll find in the PCP guide for the life domain safety and security. Some of the sample questions here include, if you live in your own home or apartment, are there supports in place to keep you safe? Do you understand who you should or should not let in your home, including strangers or repair workers? Do you know what to do in case of emergency? Do you practice safety drills, fire drills? Is there a disaster plan in place that takes your needs into account? And who is partnering with you around supported decision-making? And possible person-centered thinking tools to explore the safety and security domain include Maine's resources for supported decision-making. These are the tools and resources we're familiar with from Disability Rights Maine. A supported decision-making user's guide for people with disabilities and their supporters. And charting the life course tools for exploring supported decision-making. Again, all of these hyperlinks are included in the PCP guide for your use and reference. Examples of all 8 domains or life domains are provided within the guide itself. However, the process of learning together really should be as unique as each person you're working with. So use of specific questions or specific tools is very much optional. Some domains may hold a much higher priority for a particular person than others. So we hope these examples will really help you build a toolbox of resources that may be helpful as you plan with each particular person. In addition to the person-centered thinking resources in the guide, there are optional tools that were also covered during the introduction to charting the life course training. For example, the life trajectory tool, or the vision for what I want or what I don't want, the integrated support star tool, the reciprocal roles tool, tools for exploring decision-making supports, and exploratory questions by life domain. These exploratory questions are included in a series of life experience quick guides, and each guide is tailored to the stage of life that a person is in. So for example, there's a focus on transition to adulthood quick guide. There's a focus on adulthood quick guide, and there's also a focus on aging quick guide. And SUFO strongly recommends the questions in these quick guides to help with planning conversations. And optional tools covered in the Open Futures Learning Person-Centered Approaches Thinking and Planning module also include the Important To and Important For tool, communication passports which help in understanding people's communication styles, the Good Day, Bad Day tool, a learning log, what's working, not working, people's personal profiles, or what people like and admire about me. Again, optional tools to build a toolbox to support people with. The next step in phase 2 includes updating the annual psychosocial with information you have learned about the person. So historically, assessments used to inform planning can be very needs or deficit focused. And that can result in a very narrow view of the person, perhaps even indicating they might not be capable of trying or doing new things. Assessments can be informed with little to no evidence that the person has even had an exposure or an opportunity to experience these things, which could result in a belief that the person might lack abilities or lack potential. Using person-centered thinking instead begins to shift this dynamic. And so assessment going forward can no longer happen in a single meeting or a single visit. Instead, begin to view assessment as sort of an ongoing process of getting to know each person. And that occurs over the course of many interactions that as people get exposed to new opportunities and relationships. Remember, the person you support is the real expert. Listen to more than just their words. You can learn from people without them talking to you directly. So, as part of assessment, ongoing assessment, what will be learned is who a person is, including their strengths and capacities. What is important to the person, including their vision for a good life. And then also what specific goals relate to that vision and what they want to work towards achieving. How will you explore this? Again, these approaches are not formal approaches. It's really about exposing people to new experiences, observing and spending time together in ordinary places, talking, listening, slowing down, and also speaking to people who know the person well. Then capture your expanded knowledge of the person in the annual psychosocial assessment and use what you have learned to begin to inform the updated PCP. Working together in this way increases the likelihood of assuring both of these HCBS requirements are met. So the HCBS settings and global rule plan requirements include that clinical and support needs have been identified through an assessment of functional need, and that the plan reflects the members' strengths and preferences. Waiting to have that kind of a conversation until the plan meeting will very likely result in a narrow, non-specific view of the person. As you begin pre-planning or planning for the person's next annual PCP, ask the question, who are the people who know the person well? Almost 1 in 3 people we support say they do not have friends. So an important piece of planning is really about exploring relationships in the person's life and learning how they would like to involve others in their planning process. Families often know more about a person than anyone else. So support and appreciate the role that they can play. Explore community connections, faith-based church associations, areas of interest, talents, really anything to help identify other potential supports. Now, direct support professionals are often very valuable sources of information about the person, and a person may identify them to be in their circle of support. However, a DSP may have a difficult time thinking about the person outside of the service setting in which they know them. This can result in their perspective being really limited to what they have seen in that setting. So keep in mind, it's important that some planning conversations with the person do occur without a DSP present to really explore the ideas for each person's vision without the constraint of fitting into a specific service model. Engaging fully and respectfully with these supporters throughout planning can begin to build trust and respect and high expectations for the person. As people grow and age over time, keeping these key relationships strong will mean an ongoing exploration and learning, and also a prompt response when there is a change needed to support the person in their life. So what are we talking about really? What is a circle of support? A circle is really just about people having relationships. It's not another thing. A supporter is anyone chosen by the person who contributes to their planning process, and not only just those who attend their planning meeting. Supporters are identified on the personal plan face sheet in the PCP. Next, support the person to develop a personal profile. A profile translates all of this information that you are gathering through talking and spending time with the person into a positive summary of them. A personal profile discovers what people like and admire about them, which includes gifts, capacities, and strengths. The profile also identifies their circle of support or important relationships, the best ways to communicate with that person, technology currently used, best ways to provide support, then also how not to provide support to the person. As we know, a profile does not contain diagnoses and other labels, any sensitive issues identified by the person, medical or behavioral interventions, or any kind of a recap of all previous job and day programs. You will also explore what is important to and important for each person across life domains. Being able to separate what is important to from what is important for is one of the most important person-centered thinking tools. So what are we talking about here? Important too is really those things, those people, places, routines, interests, the things that matter the most to the person and really make them happy or feel satisfied or some sense of comfort or fulfillment. Things that are important for a person are really those things that they need to be healthy and safe, all while considering dignity of risk and each person's right to self-determination. Historically, our systems of support have tended to focus on what's important for a person, what keeps them healthy and safe. As you are exploring and thinking about life domains in the bigger context, all 8 domains, remember that a vision for a good life is not just focused on health and safety. For all people, having good health and feeling safe is important. But boy, it never defines all that we want for ourselves. In fact, many of us may choose to trade off the best possible health and the safest possible lifestyle in order to do things and be with those people and activities that really make us happy and, have personal growth. And, think about that. So in other words, we take risks, ideally and calculated, because that is what a normal part of engaging fully in life has to offer. So phase 2 is complete once you begin capturing information learned in the PCP and before the plan meeting. We're going to talk through and walk through how to identify the My Circle of Support, the person circle of support on the face sheet, capture the personal profile, which is now in the updated PCP called About Me, and a section called Getting the Life I Want, which is walking through the exploration across life domains. Let's walk through each of these sections in the updated PCP, but before we do, you will quickly notice that the PCP framework starting in June uses plain language. So this relates to the HCBS settings rule and global rule, both process and plan requirements. Process requirements state the PCP, or the person-centered planning process, should be conducted by providing the information in plain language and ensuring it's accessible to individuals with disabilities and persons who have limited English proficiency, and that the plan itself should be understandable by the person and by the individuals who are supporting that person. So at minimum, the PCP must be written in plain language and in a manner that is accessible to people, including those who have limited proficiency in English. So key to successful planning really is the ability to provide information and support the person in a way to ensure they can direct the process as much as possible and supporting them in making informed choices and decisions. Let's start by looking at where to capture information about important relationships in the person's life. As we talked about in the updated PCP, this is called My Circle of Support and is captured on the PCP face sheet. Some aspects of the PCP face sheet will be completed prior to the plan meeting, such as this, and then finalized after the plan meeting. Remember, supporters can contribute to the planning process at any time, not only those who are attending the plan meeting itself. Begin to identify who these supporters are in the PCP. Later in phase 3, you can check the box or the applicable boxes for anyone who actually participated in the plan meeting. Next, let's look at what the personal profile looks like in the updated PCP. As a reminder, the personal profile is now called About Me and contains the following sections: what people like and admire about me, important people in my life, the best ways to communicate with me are, technology I currently use, the best ways to support me, how not to support me, this is the life I have now, this is what I like about my life, and this is what I want to be different about my life. You will note the About Me profile section of the PCP is no longer one narrative box. There is plenty of space to respond to each aspect of the person's profile. This is an improvement throughout the entire updated PCP. The last place to record information before the plan meeting is in the Getting the Life I Want section. This section explores what is important to and what is important for the person across all 8 life domains. Remember, some life domains may hold more value or priority for a particular person than others. So the PCP process is really designed to help explore those aspects of a person's life that matter most to them. And what matters most may in fact change over time and with increased exposure and different opportunities. This is the last page of my vision for a good life. So after completing each and reviewing each of the 8 life domains, use the information learned to begin to construct the person's vision for a good life. This includes long-term hopes, dreams, and wishes for the future. There's also an opportunity to document here the perspective of the person's circle of support if it happens to be different than the person's vision for their own life. Phase 2 ends by documenting each step in its respective section of the updated annual PCP. So review what you've captured with the person and their guardian if applicable, incorporate any feedback they may have, and help the person begin drafting a plan meeting agenda. Next, proceed to phase 3. Phase 3 occurs 30 to 60 days before the plan effective date. It includes the case manager providing support for the person to develop a goal-oriented, individualized PCP. So this includes step 1, preparing for the meeting, step 2, hosting the plan meeting, and step 3, drafting and finalizing the PCP. While the PCP process is intended to be flexible and unique to each person you support, there are some common requirements that must be met for everyone. Let's take a look at that. So the PCP process must include or must be led by the person or representative where possible, include people chosen by the person, provide support needed for the person to direct the process as much as possible and make informed decisions, be timely and occur at times and locations convenient to the person, reflect cultural considerations. Also, the HCBS settings and global rule requires the PCP process to offer informed choices, to where the person receives services and supports and from whom, include a method for the person to request updates to their plan as needed, record the alternative HCBS settings that were considered and accepted or in fact rejected by the person, and also include strategies for resolving conflicts or disagreements within the process. This also includes clear conflict of interest guidelines for all planning individuals. Here's something to note. One of the conflict of interest provisions includes that providers of HCBS waiver services for the person or anyone who has an interest in or is employed by a provider of waiver services must not develop the PCP. The only exception to this conflict of interest provision would be when the department determines that the only willing and qualified provider to develop a PCP in a geographic area also is delivering, the only provider delivering those services. So as you prepare for the plan meeting, part of ensuring the person is directing their PCP process as much as possible includes helping them decide who they want from their circle of support to be part of their planning team. The person can choose a representative and other team members to help contribute to their PCP process. And this can include help with facilitating their plan meeting. If a person, or just a note on representatives, if a person chooses a representative, that person should participate as needed and as defined by the person, unless, of course, state law confers decision-making authority to a legal representative, such as a guardian. If a person has decision-making authority, or the representative has decision-making authority, the person's goals and desires must still be prioritized, with the guardian being expected to act based on how the person would act if they were fully competent to do so. So facilitation can take three forms: assisting the person to facilitate their plan meeting, assisting a natural support or a person in their circle to facilitate their plan meeting, if that's the person's preference, or third, you as the case manager acting as facilitator for the plan meeting if the person prefers this. Facilitators serve in a supportive role to the person based on that person's request. So sometimes as the case manager, you will be assisting the person who wishes to facilitate their own meeting. And other times, the case manager will be selected by the person or guardian to fulfill the role of facilitator. And still other times, natural support will be chosen by the person to take on that role. So really, you should be prepared to support others in facilitating the plan meeting, or assuming the role of facilitator as requested by the person based on their preference. Also key to ensuring the person directs their PCP process to the maximum extent possible includes understanding their communication style. Communication includes people expressing ideas, feelings, and desires, both through words or gestures, and even through body language to convey messages and to respond to others. So communication requires a willingness to really use all means available to understand the person and to be understood. That might include pictures, sign language, gestures, augmentative devices, interpreters, etc. So draw on what you've learned about the person and identified in their personal profile, and through exploring the communication and advocacy life domain and getting the life I want. Methods to facilitate the person's communication, including the need for any interpreters, should be known ahead of time and be arranged for to be present at the plan meeting. The PCP process includes people chosen by the person in their circle of support. A strong planning team builds and sustains relationships amongst each other. Team members will have community contacts and relationships occurring that they can draw from for resources to support the person. Team members cooperate in solving problems and helping the person attain their best life, achieve their goals, and realize their full potential and dreams. As part of preparing for the plan meeting, you'll want to confirm the availability of those individuals the person wants to be present and part of their planning team. The planning team will minimally include the person, the guardian, the correspondent, if applicable, and the case manager. The planning team helps the individual to develop their PCP, and if the person chooses to include a paid provider of service as a member of their planning team, the case manager will meet separately with the person after the plan meeting to finalize the PCP and confirm it reflects what the person wants and needs. Other actions to help prepare for the plan meeting include confirming the date, time, and location of the plan meeting as determined by the person, preparing the person for what to expect and how to maximize and communicate their vision for what they want in life, including their goals and how people can best support them around that. Identifying any sensitive issues the person has that need to be addressed prior to or outside of the plan meeting, and thinking through potential strategies for resolution. Helping the person outline their agenda and guide the discussion and clarify roles of the planning team members. Also, before the plan meeting, you'll want to share the person's personal profile, which we know is now called About Me, the Getting the Life I Want section, or what's important to and important for them across life domains, and their vision for their good life, as well as their agenda with the planning team, and any requests from the person about their expectations or desires for their plan meeting. Now let's walk through how to capture some of these key pieces in the PCP and EIS. As we mentioned earlier, some aspects of the personal plan face sheet starting June 1 will be completed prior to the meeting, such as the blue areas in this slide, and then finalized after the plan meeting. So as you help the person prepare for their plan meeting, document in the face sheet the date, time, and location the person chose for their plan meeting. Did the person ask for help with their plan meeting? Yes, no. If yes, did they ask for partial support and guidance, or did they really need maximum support and guidance? If yes, identify what types of support help. Here we have a new option to multi-select what really helps a person in maximizing and directing their planning process as much as possible. Some of the options include things like having an interpreter present, having support in understanding information, helping to communicate my wishes or decisions to others, role-playing, activities to help me understand my choices, and advocating for extra time for me to think about those choices and make decisions. As you move to step 2 and host the plan meeting, it's important to reflect on some of the HCBS related plan requirements. So the HCBS settings rule and global rule requires the plan to include individually identified goals and desired outcomes, identify the strengths, preferences, and needs, both clinical and support, of the person, reflect the services and supports, both paid and unpaid, that will assist the person to achieve their identified goals, and the providers of those services, including natural supports. The plan also needs to include the identification of risk factors and plans to minimize them, including backup plans. The PCP must also identify the individual responsible for monitoring the plan, be finalized and agreed to with informed consent of the person in writing and signed by individuals responsible for its implementation. The plan needs to be distributed to the person and other people involved in their PCP. The plan needs to prevent the provision of unnecessary or inappropriate services and supports. It needs to document any modifications to HCDS standards, and it may include the option to self-direct services where available. As the planning team convenes to develop the PCP at the plan meeting, the person's vision is really what guides the discussion as they support the person to think about and identify goals. The planning team focuses on the person's vision and what is both important to and important for the person. It identifies the person's goals across life domains. Now, bear in mind, goals are not required for each life domain. Instead, the team should support the person to really think through and prioritize some goals in the domains that really matter the most to them over others. The planning team also explores relevant strengths, barriers, and needs for the person related to the goals that they identify. Strengths can include both personal and resource strengths. Personal strengths might include things like being curious, being flexible, being motivated. And resource strengths might include things like reliable transportation or having a supportive family, or maybe having a strong faith community. Barriers might include things like personal barriers, which might be health challenges, mobility limitations, lack of exposure to opportunities, or perhaps even low self-esteem. Or they could include resource barriers, lack of reliable transportation, lack of access to assistive technology, or perhaps a physical environment that is not fully accessible. And needs, which, as we've talked about, are identified through ongoing assessment. The planning team also explores services and supports, both paid and unpaid, that are needed to achieve the person's goals. Services and supports are meant to really support life experiences that help move the person towards the achievement of the goals that they have and their vision for what they want their life to look like. So keep in mind, those services and supports can either contribute to moving in that direction or inhibit a person from moving in that direction. Here you'll consider community natural supports, non-waiver services if that's applicable, and waiver services that the person needs and desires. This will include the identification of what types of service, the number of hours, the frequency of the support, daily or weekly, and how long they may need the service. Where the person or what setting the person wants to receive these paid services, which will include the discussion around at least one non-disability specific setting considered. And service providers, the person wishes to deliver the waiver service, if that's known at this point. If the person has not yet selected the service settings and providers they want to receive the services from, that will be something you as the case manager will help in conducting the vendor call process, which is at the beginning of phase 4. Now let's look at how to capture that in the PCP itself. So the updated PCP has 5 goal pages. Each of these goal pages are the exact same format. The person you're working with may have as few or as many goals as they wish. The number of goals is unique to that person, and will be decided by that person with support from their team. If the person has more than 5 goals, there is a place to capture that later on in the PCP, and I'll share that with you when we get there. The goal description at the top of the page is where you will identify the person's goal. So again, be thinking about what you learned is important to the person when developing each goal. Here, you'll use plain language in the person's own words. This will help the person and their supporters know what they will be working towards. Next, you'll want to identify the relevant life domain that correlates to the goal. You can multi-select here if more than one life domain makes sense. Remember, there are 8 life domains, and you can select any of them here. Next, you'll identify the target date for achieving the goal. Target dates may vary depending on the steps involved, but they cannot exceed beyond 1 year. If this is the first time the person's identifying the goal, you'll select a goal status of new. Goal status can include new, in process, discontinue, or achieved. Then you'll reflect on the relevant strengths and barriers the person has related to the goal identified and capture that here. When developing goals, it's important not to lose sight of the purpose of planning and exploring and setting plans in place with the person to start to move in the direction of their good life. A person's goals are central to transferring what you've learned together using person-centered thinking into the person's plan. While supporting each person, reflect back to the beginning of what we talked about today and the common themes of what makes life worth living for all people. John O'Brien grouped these themes into the 5 valued experiences that help make a good life. As you heard about in the recent Charting the Life course training, one of the reasons for updates to the PCP process relates to feedback from self-advocates. Self-advocates have expressed a desire for self-determination and change in their lives. Some specific self-advocate feedback has included things like, my goals usually stay the same. Future planning is lacking. How can I move forward in my life? So to help facilitate a shift around this dynamic, Sufu has suggested that we start using a SMART goal model for thinking about the development of goals. Using this approach helps PCP goals be observable and measurable, which helps all to understand if and when progress is being made. Or if on the contrary, something needs to be adjusted because it's not working. So SMART stands for specific, meaning goals are written with action verbs that are observable. For example, John will gain independence is not observable, but John will cook dinner for his family is observable. Measurable. Goals that are measurable let the person know when they have been achieved. The above goal can be improved upon by adding a measure of achievement. John will cook dinner for his family once a week. Achievable. Do I have the resources of time and or money to complete my goal? Are there clear actions and steps that can be taken? In the above example, the goal might continue with a statement about why it's important for John to cook dinner for his family. John will cook dinner for his family once a week in order to contribute to his family's home life. R is for realistic. Is the goal possible to achieve? Who will help me achieve it? And then lastly, T is for timely. Goals identify periods for goal achievement. For example, if John's goal was just to cook dinner for his family, how would you know that he's accomplished this to the degree that he wants? So setting some time expectations, you better define what John hopes to accomplish and what is considered by him and his support team to be an achieved goal. Draw on what's important to the person when identifying each goal. Use plain language and the person's words to develop their personally meaningful goals. Again, this really helps them know, and their supporters know, what they will be working towards and when it has been achieved. If the person uses non-traditional communication, then document how the case manager came to understand each goal. So let's take a look at Julia. Julia has an interest in cooking, similar to John. Let's think about the opportunities to move beyond cooking only at home or in a segregated community support program. Where do other people in the community cook together? So perhaps there's a cooking class through adult ed or some other kind of group. If we reflect on John O'Brien's valued experiences, this would relate to having community presence and community participation. Then maybe we could think about, could Julia cook for public supper, community breakfast, maybe even at a shelter or a soup kitchen? Or perhaps she could bake for a local bake sale or even a church coffee hour. This would expand Julia's valued roles. So it would move from contribution, participation, and now include valued roles. And Julia would perhaps like to host a brunch, maybe a meal for friends, family, or an organization she belongs to. Maybe Julia could even take it a step further and use her cooking talents as paid employment, or maybe even as self-employment. So here again, if we reflect on John O'Brien's valued experiences, this would be supporting Julia in having contribution, again, having valued roles, and then even promoting Julia's choice. Some goals Julia might identify include SMART goals. For example, Julia will cook a meal independently for her family once a week in order to contribute to her family's home life. Julia will visit at least 3 or 5 businesses in her community over a 3-month period that make desserts for sale or serve in order to explore her interest in paid employment in the culinary field. And another SMART goal might be Julia will volunteer to bake cookies for guests at the Ronald McDonald House once a month in order to develop the valued role of baker. So let's now consider John again. So John has started learning about his neighborhood and local community by walking with staff and his brother. John has a dream of owning a bike and exploring his community independently on his bike. He has limited safety skills and is at risk for exploitation. John's team could have told him this was an unrealistic goal, as he doesn't own a bike, he really doesn't have the funds to purchase one, and in addition, he needs to learn safety skills. But instead, John's team chose to believe in his ability to learn bicycle safety skills and access technology. They trusted his community, family, and staff to provide the support he will need to work towards his goal. John O'Brien would view these as the 5 valued accomplishments of community participation, community presence, supporting contribution, having valued roles, and promoting choice. So some SMART goals for John might include John will learn bike safety by going on a bike ride once a week with his brother or his DSP of choice. John will join the local bike club to establish some relationships with other bike riding enthusiasts. Or John will be able to access his community independently using his bike. So next on each goal page, remember the PCP now has 5 goal pages. On each goal page is a section to identify the risks associated with a person's goal, the plan the team will identify to address those risks, and a backup plan. As we saw, the HCBS settings rule and global rule requires the PCP to include planning for choices and risks. When discussing individual goals and choices, the team will want to consider, why is the goal or the choice important to the person? What are the potential risks? And these risks might include physical health, behavioral health, personal safety or safety of others, financial risks or environmental risks. Then the team will consider, what are the benefits to the person? And maybe even what are some of the alternatives to the chosen activity? Some questions to consider: if a person has identified a hesitancy to move forward with a goal, what is it that they don't feel safe about? Maybe ask, what would it help to make you feel safe enough to try? There might be something that happened in that person's history that is preventing them from wanting to take a first step. Together, explore this as a team. Part of helping people think about their goals and making individual choices includes the concept of dignity of risk. Dignity of risk is the right to take risks when engaging in life experiences, and then the right to fail in those activities. Seeking and finding balance between self-determination and overall health and safety is a goal of planning, and it is possible to honor choices and mitigate risks. Lack of experiences and overprotection can result in lowered expectations, learned dependency, low self-esteem, and even underachievement for the person. Let's think back to our example of Julia and her desire to cook a meal independently for her family once a week. Perhaps Julia's goal even extends to being able to cook independently when she wants. Let's consider the process of exploring and planning for risks. Here is how we would plan for risks with Julia. We would explore, why is the goal or choice important to her? We know Julia wants to give back to her family and prepare meals on her own whenever she wants. What are the potential risks? Well, those might include risk of injury, food safety concerns, or perhaps even fire safety concerns. What are the potential benefits? Well, Julia will feel like she has value and something to contribute to her family and others she cares about. What are some alternatives to this choice? Well, there could be some joint meal preparation or even providing pre-prepared meals for her family. So here's where the team develops a plan for mitigating risks. So the plan will include food safety training, meal prep or cooking training, and then an assessment of Julia's ability to apply the information she's learning. The team's going to install fire extinguishers and also provide training in how to use fire extinguishers. And then start by limiting the time of day that Julia will cook at first to ensure that staff are present in the home as she's doing independent meal prep. Also including the installation of smoke detectors. The backup plan the team has identified would include staff checking in virtually or by phone during the planned independent meal prep time, or helping Julia to create pre-prepared meals assisted by staff. The team together will decide when and how the plan will be revisited, analyzed, monitored, and even modified if needed. Now let's consider John. Again, John has a SMART goal of traveling independently on his bike in and around his community once a week. Here's how we would plan for risks with John. We would explore, why is the goal or choice important to John? Well, he wants to navigate his bike on his own to be more independent. What are some of the potential risks of his goal? Well, that might include getting stranded, possibly having physical injury. He might be vulnerable to harm or exploitation. It could be complex using the resources needed to navigate independently. And it could potentially result in a disruption of other scheduled services. What are the potential benefits of John taking this risk? Well, John will feel he has more independence and is an active member of his community. He may feel a lot less reliant on others to take him where he wants to go. What are some alternatives to John's choice? Well, there could be joint outings with friends and family. Maybe staff could also supervise his community bicycle outings. And he could learn to use public transportation instead of using his bike. So the team makes a plan for mitigating risks. John is going to engage in bicycle safety training. He's going to gain familiarity with his neighborhood and community through training. There will be an ongoing assessment of his ability to apply the knowledge he's learning. And he'll also get support and training around using his phone and a Maps app if he's running late or getting lost. And ensure that when John begins to travel independently on trips, that staff are available and accessible at that time. The team also identifies a backup plan. John's brother will check in virtually or by phone during planned independent community navigation, but also be available to dispatch to John if it's needed. Again, the team will outline how and when the plan will be revisited, monitored, and modified if needed. Next, the team considers supports to help the person achieve their goals. A key component of the PCP process includes exploring and discovering supports in a person's life, as we've talked about. Charting the life course helps us think about supports in a different way. The extending supports beyond the traditional, formal, paid services and natural supports to include things like community resources, relationships, and assistive technology are other types of supports to consider, and supports that really can help move a person towards their inclusive quality life. So on each goal page, the team will brainstorm and identify services and supports outside of waiver services that will help the person achieve their goal. Specifically, capture any community or natural supports that might help the person with their goal, and any non-waiver services that might be available. These might include things like folk rehab, benefits counseling, state plan services such as PNMIs, or perhaps even outpatient counseling to support the person's goal. Non-waiver services could also include case management. Waiver services, as applicable, are identified in a different section of the PCP on the existing home support, community support, etc. dimensions. We're going to review that shortly together. Next, the team breaks down the key steps or milestones that will help the person progress towards their goal. What might be the first step? Steps help make the goal more understandable, and break down how the goal might be achieved. It also helps build confidence about the future when you can see progress on steps. In our previous example about Julia's SMART goal is to cook dinner for her family once a week. So the key steps for Julia to help achieve that goal might include things like menu planning, grocery shopping, inviting family over, cooking and serving them dinner. As you identify a step, you'll want to make sure you identify who or what service is responsible to help achieve that step. And then identify the start date and the target end date for when the step will be completed. Again, target dates should not extend beyond 1 year. The remainder of each goal page is a space for a 90-day review of the plan. This section will not be completed until phase 5, and we'll cover that later. After the 5 goal pages in the PCP, you will find a very familiar page now called My Case Management Services. Although this page is largely the same as the current case management main care service description page, it does have some updates. First, it does add the option to select a funding type called time-limited case management. This is an optional contracted service that some of your case management agencies may have elected to offer. It also adds a space to check which goals you, as the case manager, will be assisting the person to achieve. It no longer includes the case management service planning narrative. Next in the PCP is when waiver services needed to help achieve the person's vision are identified. As a public entity, the department has a responsibility under Title II of the ADA to ensure individuals receive services in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. To that end, as part of updates to this PCP process, the department is implementing a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice. Part of this agreement includes that waiver services will be determined through an assessment of each person's functional needs and preferences, not provider preference. The PCP process will identify the amount, frequency, and type of waiver services necessary for the person to receive services in the most integrated setting appropriate. Choosing a service and where it happens should be based on the needs and preferences of the person. A service provider should not make those decisions. As a result, a waiver provider will not enter any information in the PCP going forward. Instead, waiver providers will complete a new form called a service implementation plan. We will review more about service implementation plans in phase 4 after the PCP is finalized. The updated PCP includes 6 waiver service dimensions. These are familiar to you: home support, community support, which includes community membership, work, employment supports, assistive technology, career planning, and ancillary supports. These should look very similar to the current main care service description pages. Here, you will work with a person in the planning team to identify the waiver services the person needs and desires, including services necessary for health and safety. You will fill out the request type, which is new, continued, change, or discontinued, the funding type, section 21 or 29, the type of service. In this example, we've identified work support individual, the number of hours requested, the frequency, whether it's daily or weekly, and the proposed start date. I know you aren't accustomed to completing these pages, but this is a key update to the PCP process. You will continue by identifying where the person wishes to receive their services, including non-disability specific settings, and which of the person's goals the service will support the person with. Next, on the waiver service dimension page, you will continue to identify the types and level of support needed by the person. So in this example, the services, again, work, support, individual. So you may identify the person as having the following needs for support. So the person might need prompting to adhere to workplace policies, some physical assistance to improve their workplace productivity, and monitoring to maintain employment. At the bottom of each waiver service page is a space to identify which service provider the person wishes to choose, if that's known. There are multiple lines there if the person chooses more than one provider to work with. If the person has not yet selected who their provider will be or what setting they prefer to receive their services in, the case manager will initiate a vendor call process in the beginning of phase 4 to help with that. In order to assure that waiver services are determined through an assessment of each person's functional needs and preferences and not provider preference, the team will reflect on sources of information used during the planning process. We've talked about assessments, including the DS psychosocial assessment. We've talked about identifying what's important to and important for each person during planning. And now consider the BMS 99 as a potential source of information. The BMS 99, as you know, is the state of Maine's level of care assessment tool used to evaluate and reevaluate, at least annually, whether a person meets the level of care criteria for services through sections 21 and 29. The level of need identified in the BMS 99 correlates to many of the supports needed sections in each of the waiver service dimensions. As an example, here we'll look at community membership. So if the person has identified a desire to receive community membership, when reflecting on the type and level of support needed on the community support page, consider the level of support that has been identified in the BMS 99. For example, let's take a look at the blue arrows. Under community membership, you may have identified a person needs support to explore and connect to community places. This will correlate nicely to the level of support assessed for community access on the BMS 99. And perhaps the person also has a need for support to develop and maintain relationships, including natural supports. So this level of support, as evidenced by the green arrows, should connect nicely to the assessment of support around maintaining relationships on the BMS 99. And finally, the person may have a need for support around independent and daily living skills, as shown by the yellow arrows. This should relate to the assessment for support on activities of daily living in the BMS 99. So as you are completing the supports needed section in the PCP on the applicable waiver service dimensions, remember it may be helpful to reflect on the level of support needed in the BMS 99. Next in the PCP are some new dimensions. My Transportation Services and Supports is a brand new opportunity to document when a person needs or uses transportation, and that can include both NET and other services and supports, in fact. It includes if the person can have an unattended drop-off or not, and has any medical conditions or requires any accommodations during transport. It does include a space to offer the best ways to support the person, to check which goals the transportation is assisting in meeting, and includes emergency contact information. Self-direction is also a new option or dimension in the PCP. As you may have heard, self-direction is becoming a new option available for recipients of Section 29. It will allow members to manage their own services, decide who to hire, and control their own schedule. The case manager's role does not change when a person elects to self-direct. Case managers will still present this as an option to members or individuals as they do with traditional agency services. They'll continue to develop the PCP, submit vendor calls for self-direction, submit authorization requests, monitor services, and update the PCP as needed. OADS has recently provided 2 introductory trainings regarding this new option, and there will be much more information available coming soon. So for now, know that the updated PCP has a new dimension to capture self-direction. Although unmet needs are not new, the way in which they're going to be captured going forward is changing. Currently, unmet needs are identified in the Services and Supports Assessment version 7. Going forward, unmet needs are a specific dimension in the PCP. An unmet need is a gap in resources to address identified specific needs or desires of the person. An unmet need is determined minimally by the person, their guardian, if applicable, the correspondent, if applicable, and the case manager. An unmet need really relates to a person's goal in their PCP, is a resource or service needed to achieve a goal, and the service or resource is not currently available. There may be no unmet needs identified by the team. In this case, my plan has no unmet needs will get checked at the top. However, if the team does identify any unmet needs, you will select a status of unmet, then identify the unmet need category. This is a drop-down list categorized by life domains. You'll describe the unmet need. You'll identify the goal the unmet need relates to, and then select or enter the date the need was determined unmet. When an unmet need exists, it's important the team identify an interim plan and document that here. As part of the interim plan, you will identify who will assist, alternative methods of meeting the need in the interim, and the timeline for addressing the unmet need. Unmet needs due to unsuccessful vendor calls or securing of needed services may not be known until later in the process in phase 4. Here we'll return to our example of John and his goal of riding a bike in his community independently. But John currently needs a bike to achieve his goal. So the unmet need category for John would be community engagement, transportation. The description of the unmet need would be John has always wanted a bike. He and his team have agreed that he will learn to access his community independently on his bike. They have developed a plan so he can learn to do this safely. He does not own a bike and will need to purchase a new or a used one. So related goals, you would check the related goal on the goal page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this case, the related goal was John wants to ride his bike out and around his community independently 1 day a week. And then you would enter the date the need was determined as unmet. And in the interim plan, you would include John and his team will explore ways in which John can save money to purchase a bike. John's case manager will explore options for renting or purchasing a used bike. And his brother, John's brother, has a bike he can use until he can purchase his own. The final page in the PCP is a dimension called Additional Plan Details. Since the PCP no longer has large narrative boxes, this space might serve as an overflow when you run out of space to document in other areas of the PCP. We don't anticipate this happening with a lot of frequency, but an example of this might be if the person has more than 5 goals. Well, the PCP currently has 5 goal pages. So here you could identify additional goals that the person might have. And then finally, on this last page, there continues to be a space for the case manager to document a dissenting opinion. So step 3 in drafting and finalizing the PCP includes the PCP is finalized based on what is learned throughout this phase, phase 2, and during the planning team discussion at the plan meeting. At the conclusion of the plan meeting, you will draft the PCP by capturing the discussions and decisions made by the person in the planning team for review and feedback. If the person chooses to include a paid provider of service in their planning team, the case manager will meet with the person separately to confirm that the PCP reflects what the person wants and needs, and finalize the PCP by securing all required signatures. In addition to completing each applicable dimension in the PCP, you will return to the face sheet and complete with information learned at the plan meeting. So some of this includes identifying who in the person's circle of support actually participated in the plan meeting. Also, you'll identify if the person was at their plan meeting, and if not, why. Also, if not, what did you do to incorporate the person's input into planning? You'll capture on the face sheet if the person received the types of support they identified as being helpful, and did the person facilitate or co-facilitate their meeting? And if they didn't, describe why and who did facilitate. On the face sheet, you'll identify the PCP review schedule. How often does the person want to review their satisfaction and progress with goals? And you will add routine health information such as the medical, dental, vision exams and medication review dates, as well as pertinent medical provider information. If the person is not receiving Section 21 or 29 waiver funding, you will secure approval on the PCP face sheet at this point by reviewing and completing this section of the face sheet called the Person Survey, which includes providing information to the person and guardian, if applicable, about the developmental services grievance process. So you'll see here under the person survey, there's several questions to review with the person. After reviewing those questions and answering them yes or no, you will check person guardian plan approved to reflect that the approval of the plan. And also here you will identify if the PCP includes a positive support plan, a safety device plan, an HCBS modification addendum, or a behavior management plan as applicable. At the bottom of the face sheet, which you don't see here, are the approval signature dates and a checkbox for a case manager attestation. Phase 3 ends by distributing the final PCP to the person and their planning team. If the person is receiving Section 21 or 29 waiver funding, Next, you'll proceed to phase 4. Phase 4 involves the work conducted after the plan meeting, after the annual meeting. If a person is selecting new waiver services, is changing existing waiver services, or is seeking updates to existing service implementation plans to reflect services to be provided in the next year. So step 1 involves conducting vendor calls if selecting new waiver services or the person wants to change existing waiver services. Step 2 is when waiver providers that the person has chosen will draft a service implementation plan, or SIP for short. And step 3 involves hosting a meeting to finalize SIP development if desired by the person. After the plan meeting, the next step is vendor selection, if needed. For individuals who have not yet chosen their waiver service provider or the settings to receive their services, the case manager will provide support to complete a vendor call, expose the person to the provider and setting options that respond and are available, and discuss if the provider setting is a good fit so the person can make a final determination using informed choice. And provide support to the person to contact the provider to let them know they've been chosen. If the person has chosen to continue with an existing provider, then the case manager will support the person to let that provider know they wish to continue with them. After the vendor selection, the next step is developing a service implementation plan. The case manager will share the PCP or components of it with the selected providers and host calls or have conversation as needed between providers and the person, including planning team members as necessary, to discuss settings and services desired. Selected providers will draft a proposed service implementation plan. What is a service implementation plan you might be asking? So a service implementation plan is to ensure clear expectations and adherence to the person-centered plan by providers. So to do that, the department has finalized this new form called the SIP that is attached to the PCP. The Service Implementation Plan, or SIP, is a required standardized form that will be in EIS starting June 1st that will be used to document the provider's service delivery strategy for the requested waiver service and how they will support the person around their chosen goals. The Service Implementation Plan will include specific timeframes and strategies for goal implementation that are specific, measurable, and achievable. You might be wondering, what are some of the ways that a SIP differs from the completion of current service planning narratives and goal description pages? First, goals are identified by the person with the help from their case manager and other natural or family supports and allies. The focus of goal development is on strengthening natural supports, increasing community involvement, community membership, contribution, and employment. The person will choose their services and settings for those services. Providers will receive referrals to serve the person when they can offer the service in the setting chosen. The person and their planning team will propose or identify the amount, frequency, and type and level of support needed for each waiver service identified. And that will be based on the goals, the person's goals and related needs for each service. If the provider can meet their request, the person's request as proposed, the provider will then develop the service implementation plan, which describes how they will deliver the service in the setting selected by the person to help the person achieve their goals. The person and the planning team identify risks in the areas of health, behavior, and personal safety, as well as identify mitigation strategies and backup plans. And this information is then shared with providers as they develop the SIP. The SIP addresses those needs and risk factors, or makes a different recommendation with justification detailed in the SIP for the person to think about. The SIP will also consider reportable events and any safety plans, positive support plans, behavior management plans, and HCBS modification addendums as applicable. After the waiver provider develops a service implementation plan, the case manager will assist the person and their team to review and accept or reject the proposed SIP. Schedule a meeting if that's desired with the chosen provider, DSPs, to review the SIP and coordinate the paid services with other natural or community supports. During this meeting, the goals will include coordinating between providers and natural supports for continuity and seamless provision, with the goal of helping the person achieve their goal and have their needs met. Consider if there are any newly identified unmet needs that aren't already captured in the PCP, and develop interim plans for addressing those. And review and refine the service implementation plan as needed. At the conclusion of the meeting, the case manager will work with the person and guardian, if applicable, to finalize the SIP with the person and guardian's approval, or choose another provider if desired. Even though the service implementation plan is a separate form in EIS, the PCP captures when a service implementation plan is approved by the person and guardian, if applicable. You'll want to return to the face sheet to check my PCP includes a service implementation plan. If a SIP or SIPs are completed prior to the PCP effective plan date, then you will check on the face sheet, my PCP includes a service implementation plan. Then you'll complete the SIP survey questions, enter the approval signature dates, and check the case manager attestation. However, if a SIP or SIPs are completed after the PCP effective plan date, then you'll return to the PCP to reversion it and update the face sheet by completing the same activities. Check my PCP includes a service implementation plan, complete the SIP survey questions, enter approval dates, and check the case manager attestation. You might be saying, what is a SIP survey? Well, the SIP survey is a couple of questions on the face sheet that indicates the person got to choose the providers in their plan, yes or no, and that the person is in agreement with the service implementation plans, yes or no. And finally is the approval dates and that case manager attestation. Phase 4 ends when the service implementation plan is finalized and documented as addenda to the PCP. Phase 5 is the final phase in the PCP process and includes step 1, case manager check-ins. So case manager is checking in with the person at minimum once a month, unless it's otherwise specified in their PCP, to check on the status of their plan, including their satisfaction with services, progress in achieving goals, identifying any new unmet needs, or how interim plans are going with resolving gaps in supports. And also in-person visits. So at minimum, the case manager is having in-person visits at the person's home twice a year, and minimally twice a year where the person spends their day in the community. So monitoring by the case manager is focusing on ensuring the person's satisfaction, supports and services are implemented consistent with the plan, appropriate progress on goals is made, or if progress is not being made, that changes are implemented to address the lack of progress, and that all supports and services are effectively coordinated for the benefit of the person. Next, the case manager continues to expand their learning about the person to inform assessment and ongoing planning. So ongoing learning and exploration occurs during in-person visits and check-ins using person-centered thinking tools, or scheduling time with a person in ordinary places, or scheduling time with individuals who know the person well in their circle, all to increase and encourage experiences and better inform assessment. Some person-centered thinking resources to consider here: the 4+1 questions, the satisfaction surveys, and a tool called the Life Trajectory Tool, which is a resource through Charting the Life course. These person-centered thinking resources are all available in the updated PCP guide to help look at progress on goals, satisfaction, and changes if changes and needs are assessed. As you are connecting with the person throughout the year, remember to ask, do services and supports help the person move in the direction of their goals and vision? Here is the actual Life Trajectory Tool. And this tool is a space to explore things that are going well in the person's life and maybe some things that are getting in the way. So the ongoing process of assessing and getting to know the person is going to happen over the course of many interactions you have throughout the year. And these interactions are intended to promote experiences for the person to make choices and informed decisions around potentially new personal goals. The case manager and the planning team can use what they learn about the person to help inform the next annual PCP process by returning to phase 2, which begins at least 60 to 90 days in advance of the next effective plan date. When completing 90-day reviews of the PCP, the case manager will connect with the person to determine their satisfaction with the activities they're doing, paid services and settings and providers. Also connect with providers to determine the person's progress in accomplishing their goals, development of other types of supports, integrated supports, including natural supports and community membership, and general implementation of the service plan. As we mentioned earlier, after you complete the updated plan in EIS, you will no longer be using the services and supports assessment going forward. So 90-day reviews will be conducted within each respective goal page on the PCP. We will be covering this in more detail in part 2 of this training. Phase 5 ends with a return to phase 2 to use the information learned throughout the year to inform the next annual planning process, which begins with at least 60 to 90 days in advance of the next effective plan date. This ends our overview of Maine's Enhanced Person-Centered Planning Process, Part 1. Next, please proceed with Part 2, which will familiarize you with how the PCP will look in EIS beginning June 1st, 2022. Your feedback is important to us, so please direct your questions and ideas as you are learning and getting comfortable in this new process to personcenteredplanning.dhhs@maine.gov. Thank you.